My grandmother left a chilling warning from the grave, hidden beneath my bedroom floorboards. She told me to cancel the wedding or I would vanish. I thought it was senility until I found the secret cellar in the Thorne mansion. There, I discovered a $50 million life insurance policy with my name on it. This wedding is not a fairy tale. It is a death sentence, and I am the intended prey. My name is Clara Vance. At 32 years old, I have built a reputation at Silver Creek as a woman who can sniff out a lie hidden within a million rows of data. As a lead forensic auditor, my life is defined by cold, hard facts and the unshakable logic of a balance sheet. Yet, standing in my bedroom in the middle of a torrential Pacific Northwest downpour, the logic I usually relied on felt like it was dissolving into the gray mist outside. I was supposed to be packing for the most anticipated wedding of the year. In less than a week, I would become the wife of Julian Thorne, the golden heir to Ethelgard dynamics. The Thorne family was the closest thing this region had to royalty, their shipbuilding empire stretching across the coast like a titan of industry. But as I moved a heavy vanity to reach a corner of the closet, I noticed a floorboard that did not sit flush with the others. Underneath that loose piece of oak sat an old, rusted tin box. It belonged to my grandmother, Rose, who had passed away 5 years ago. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling slightly as I pried open the lid. Inside was a single piece of yellowed parchment with handwriting that looked frantic and rushed. "Cancel the wedding, Clara. Don't let them touch your signature." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the ink, trying to reconcile the image of my sweet, albeit eccentric, grandmother with this desperate warning. Rose had always been vocal about her distaste for the ultra-wealthy, often calling them vultures in silk suits. I had dismissed her grumbling as the bitter residue of a life spent in the working class, but seeing it now, written with such violence, made my breath hitch. "Clara, are you ready yet, darling?" The voice was smooth, like expensive bourbon, and it belonged to Julian. He was standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the hallway light. At 35, he was the picture of American success, tall and broad-shouldered with a smile that could melt the resolve of the toughest CEO. But as he stepped into the room, I noticed his eyes. They were not looking at me with the warmth of a fiancé. They were scanning the room with a sharp, calculating precision that I had seen many times in the interrogation rooms at Silver Creek. I was just looking through some old things," I said, my voice trailing off as I tucked the note into my palm. Julian walked toward me, his movements fluid and predatory. He didn't seem to notice the tin box. Instead, he pulled a thick manila folder from his leather briefcase and set it on the bed. "We need to get these finalized before the rehearsal dinner tomorrow," he said, his tone shifting into something more businesslike. "It is just the standard family asset authorization paperwork. My mother is insisting on it for the board of directors. She wants everything to be seamless." He handed me a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen. I looked down at the documents. The legalese was dense, swirling before my eyes. "Julian, I haven't even had a chance to read through the 100 pages of this," I whispered, the pen feeling like a lead weight in my hand. His hand came to rest on my shoulder, his grip just a fraction too firm. "Clara, honey, don't be difficult. You know how my mother is about the company. It is just a formality. Just sign it and we can go to dinner." As the tip of the pen touched the first signature line, a sudden, violent jolt of cold electricity raced up my spine. It was a visceral, primal reaction that bypassed my analytical brain entirely. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, screaming about my signature. I need a glass of water," I stammered, pulling my hand away. "My head is... it is spinning. Julian," he sighed, a flash of genuine irritation crossing his face before he masked it with a fake pout. "Fine. Go get your water, but hurry up. We are expected at the club by 8 o'clock. I hurried into the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs. While the tap ran, I pulled the manila folder toward the edge of the counter where I had hidden my portable scanner for work. With shaking hands, I fed the top 3 pages through the device and tucked the digital copies into my hidden cloud drive. Then, I slid a physical copy of the main authorization page into the secret lining of my laptop bag. When I returned to the bedroom, Julian was staring out the window at the rain. He didn't look back as I signed the documents, my handwriting appearing stiff and forced. I handed him the folder, and he tucked it away with a satisfied nod. "There," he said, kissing my forehead. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" I forced a smile, but my skin crawled where his lips touched me. I wasn't just an auditor anymore. I was a woman who had just realized she was walking into a trap, and the only way out was to play the role of the victim until I could find the teeth of the machine. Obsidian Manor stood like a jagged crown on the cliffs of the Puget Sound, a monument to the staggering wealth of Ethelgard dynamics. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the hushed, predatory murmurs of the 1%. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, wearing a white silk gown that had cost $10,000, feeling less like a bride and more like a lamb being inspected before the slaughter. The room was packed with shareholders and power brokers, all of them wearing smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Then, she arrived. Elena Thorne, Julian's younger sister, swept into the ballroom in a dress so red it looked like a fresh wound against the sterile white marble. She didn't walk, she marched, commanding the attention of every man in the room. She was the personification of the Thorne legacy, beautiful, cold, and utterly lethal. Elena made a straight line for me, a crystal glass of heavy Cabernet clutched in her manicured hand. As she reached my side, she didn't slow down. With a movement so practiced it looked like a choreographed dance. Her heel caught on the rug, and the dark red liquid arched through the air. It splashed across my chest, soaking into the delicate silk and spreading like a blooming bruise. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby investors. I stood frozen, the cold wine seeping through to my skin, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Oh, Clara, I am so terribly sorry," Elena said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that made my skin crawl. She stepped closer, leaning in as if to help me, but her hand gripped my elbow with bruising force. She pressed her lips to my ear, her breath smelling of grapes and malice. "This stain, it is just like your position in this family, permanent and impossible to wash away. You are a footnote, a temporary guest, and you will never belong." She pulled back, wearing a mask of faux horror for the crowd. I looked around the room, searching for Julian. I found him standing near the CEO of a major defense contractor, a champagne flute in his hand. He had seen the whole thing. He knew his sister had just humiliated me in front of the people who would soon be my peers. I hurried toward him, my voice trembling. "Julian, please, I need to go change. Look at what she did. I can't stay here like this." Julian didn't even look at the red mess on my dress. He didn't even look me in the eye. He kept his gaze fixed on the man he was trying to impress, his jaw tight with irritation. "Stop being so dramatic." "Clara," he hissed under his breath, his smile never wavering for the benefit of the cameras. "It is just a dress. You are making a scene and ruining the mood for the board members. Go to the powder room and stop acting like a child. I have $200 million in contracts on the line tonight, and I don't have time for your sensitivity." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. To the Thorne family, I was not a partner. I was not a person. I was a prop, a useful, disposable accessory designed to soften Julian's image while they executed whatever dark plans they had for my signature. I looked at the powerful men and women in the room, and for the first time, I saw them for what they were, a pack of wolves in designer clothing. I can't do this. Julian, I whispered, my voice breaking. Then leave, he snapped, finally glancing at me with a look of pure coldness. But do it quietly. Don't embarrass me further. I didn't go to the powder room. I didn't wait for a valet. I walked out of Obsidian Manor, the cold night air hitting my wet skin like a slap. I got into my car and drove. The rain started again, blurring the lights of the city as I pushed the engine to its limit. I wasn't going home to our penthouse. I wasn't going to hide. I drove 30 miles north to the private estate of my future mother-in-law, Lydia Thorne. Julian had mentioned she was staying in the city tonight, and I remembered the gate code he had absent-mindedly punched in while I was in the passenger seat a month ago. My mind was racing, the auditor in me finally taking control. If the Thornes were treating me like a liability, it was because they were hiding something that made me a threat. I pulled up to the darkened mansion, my hands steady on the wheel despite the wine still staining my chest. It was 11 o'clock at night. The house was a tomb of secrets, and I was done being the victim. I was going to find out exactly why my grandmother had told me to run. The gates of the Thorne estate groaned open as I punched in the 5-digit code Julian had absent-mindedly muttered weeks ago while we were driving. The secondary mansion was a Victorian monstrosity of gray stone and sharp gables, tucked away in a forest of hemlock trees that seemed to swallow the moonlight. I stepped inside, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me. The air was thick and cloying, a nauseating mix of expensive sandalwood candles and the scent of something old and rotting hidden beneath a fresh coat of polish. It felt like walking into a tomb that had been decorated for a party. I made my way to the library, my footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs. Julian had once joked about his mother's hidden sanctuary, and as an auditor, I knew that secrets were rarely kept in plain sight. I ran my fingers along the spines of the leather-bound books until I found a volume of maritime law that felt slightly loose. When I pulled it, a mechanical click echoed through the silent room, and a section of the shelving swung inward. I descended a narrow concrete staircase that led deep into the earth. At the bottom, I didn't find a dusty cellar. Instead, I stepped into a room that looked like a high-tech command center. Rows of high-end laser printers and sophisticated signature-matching machines hummed with a low, predatory vibration. On a central mahogany table, I saw stacks of paper. I picked one up, my heart stopping in my chest. It was a contract for a $3 million loan from an offshore creditor. At the bottom was my signature. It was perfect. It was flawless. But I had never seen this document in my life. I began to dig through the stacks. There were thousands of them. Loans, property transfers, and debt obligations, all totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. And every single one was signed by me. No, this can't. It's not possible, I whispered, my voice caught in my throat. My hands were shaking so violently that I nearly dropped the heavy manila folder I found tucked at the back of the desk. The label read, Post-Marital Asset Liquidation Subject Clara. I opened it, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Inside was a life insurance policy issued only 2 weeks ago. The coverage amount was $50 million. I was the insured party, but the primary beneficiaries were not my family or a trust. They were Julian and Elena Thorne. Attached to the policy was a typed itinerary for our honeymoon in the Maldives, with a specific date circled in red, the 14th of next month. Next to the date, a single word was handwritten in Lydia's elegant, sharp script, incident. A cold, paralyzing dread washed over me. I wasn't just a bride, I was a financial instrument. I was a $50 million payout waiting to happen. I stumbled toward the back of the room, my shoulder hitting a heavy iron door that was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, expecting more files. But what I found was far worse. It was a small, windowless room lined with glass display cases. Inside were personal items: a tattered silk scarf, a gold locket, a pair of wedding bands, and a single dried rose. Each case had a small brass plaque with a name and a date. Sarah Thorne, 1998. Missing. Catherine Thorne, 2005. Accidental fall. Rebecca Thorne, 2012. Unexplained illness. I looked at the empty glass case at the very end of the row. It was polished and waiting. The plaque was already engraved. Clara Vance Thorne, 2026. Oh, God, they've done this before. Julian, you monster, I choked out, the air in the room suddenly feeling thin and toxic. My lungs burned as I tried to draw a breath, my vision blurring with tears of pure, unadulterated terror. I have to get out. I have to go. Now. I realized then that my grandmother hadn't just been bitter, she had been a witness, and if I didn't move fast, I was going to become the next trophy in the Thorne family's basement. The panic was a luxury I could no longer afford. I felt the familiar, icy numbness of my profession settle over me, a mental armor I had worn through 1,000 high-stakes corporate investigations. My heart rate slowed, my hands ceased their trembling, and my eyes became cameras. I was no longer a terrified fiancé trapped in a basement. I was a lead forensic auditor, and I had just walked into the crime scene of the century. I pulled my phone from my pocket and began to work. Click. I captured the high-resolution images of the fake loan agreements. Click. I photographed the $50 million insurance policy. Click. I documented the signature forgery machines. As I scrolled through the digital files on the main terminal, the true scale of the rot at Ethelgard Dynamics began to emerge. The shipyards were not just struggling, they were a hollowed-out shell, a financial corpse being kept upright by a complex web of deceit. The company was drowning in nearly $700 million of debt. They had been funneling government maritime subsidies into private accounts for years, and now the federal investigators were closing in. They needed a scapegoat. They needed someone with a spotless reputation, someone like me to sign off on the massive restructuring documents that would consolidate the fraud. Julian hadn't fallen in love with me. He had scouted me. He had used my name to secure tens of millions in high-interest loans from shadow lenders. Criminal organizations that didn't bother with courtrooms when they wanted their money back. I found a hidden directory labeled The Architect. It was Elena. She was the one who had built the shell companies, layering them through 3 different offshore jurisdictions. She was the one who had choreographed the entire play. You monsters. You've been using me as a human shield. I whispered into the dark, my voice cold and hollow. I dug deeper into the older archives, searching for the name that had brought me here. Rose Vance. I found a payroll record from 35 years ago. My grandmother hadn't just been a critic of the rich, she had been the head bookkeeper for Julian's father. She had seen the beginning of the rot. I found a termination letter followed by a non-disclosure agreement that had never been signed. Rose hadn't been senile. She had been a witness. 5 years ago, when she died of a sudden heart attack, I had accepted it as natural. Now, looking at the Thorne family's history of accidents, I knew better. They had murdered her to keep her quiet, and now they were preparing to do the same to me. I checked the timestamp on the insurance policy. It was finalized yesterday. The incident in the Maldives wasn't just a possibility, it was the exit strategy for their debt. If I died, the $50 million payout would cover their immediate obligations to the shadow lenders, and my signature on the fraud documents would ensure that all legal blame died with me. I can't just leave. I realized the weight of the situation crushing the air from my lungs. If I cancel the wedding now, if I run, they'll simply trigger the backup plan. They'll make sure I have an accident before I even reach the state line. I stood in the center of the high-tech cellar, the hum of the servers sounding like a ticking clock. My analytical mind began to construct a counter-offensive. If the Thornes wanted a wedding, I would give them one. I would give them the most expensive, most publicized wedding in the history of the West Coast. I would use the next 72 hours to perform a reverse audit. I would trace every cent, every offshore account, and every forged signature. I would lure them into a sense of total security, letting them believe their prey was docile and unaware. "You want my signature?" "Julian," I muttered, my eyes narrowing as I looked at the empty glass case meant for me. "I'm going to give you exactly what you asked for, but it won't be a death warrant for me. It's going to be the end of everything you've ever built." I carefully closed the secret door and reset the library shelf. I walked out of the mansion, my white dress still stained with wine, but my mind was as clear as a winter morning. The hunt had begun, and the Thornes had no idea that the lamb had just learned how to use a knife. I walked into the sun-drenched breakfast room at 8 a.m. sharp, my face a mask of perfect bridal radiance. I had spent 3 hours applying enough concealer to hide the dark circles of a woman who had seen her own grave, and enough perfume to drown out the lingering scent of that rotting cellar. Elena was already there, sipping an espresso and looking like a queen who had just successfully executed a peasant. I waited until she looked up before I lowered my head, making my shoulders slump just enough to signal defeat. "Elena," I wanted to say. "I am so sorry for my behavior last night," I whispered, my voice caught in a practiced tremor. "I was overwhelmed. The dress, the pressure. I shouldn't have taken it out on you or Julian. You were just trying to welcome me into the family, and I made a fool of myself." Elena's eyes narrowed, searching for a trap, but I gave her nothing but a look of pathetic submissiveness. A slow, cruel smirk spread across her face as she set her cup down. She believed she had finally broken the professional auditor. "Apology accepted. Clara," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It is a lot for someone of your background to handle. Just try to keep your composure for the next 48 hours. We have a reputation to maintain." As soon as she turned away, the warmth in my eyes died. I stepped onto the terrace and pulled out my burner phone. I sent a single encrypted message to Marcus, a former corporate investigator and the only man I trusted with my life. 5 minutes later, my screen glowed with a response. Marcus had been digging through Julian's personal server. He found a pending wire transfer scheduled for the hour after our wedding ceremony. Julian was preparing to move $200 million to a private bank in the Cayman Islands. It was the entire remaining liquid capital of Ethelgard Dynamics, the money they had stolen from the government. "Clara, there you are." Julian appeared behind me, his hands sliding around my waist. I forced myself not to shiver in disgust. He leaned in, pressing a small velvet box into my hand. Inside was a necklace featuring a pear-shaped diamond that must have cost at least $500,000. "A peace offering," he murmured, his breath hot against my neck. "Let me put it on you." As he fastened the clasp, my fingers brushed against the heavy platinum setting. My pulse quickened as I felt a tiny, unnatural protrusion on the back of the pendant, a state-of-the-art GPS tracker and a microphone. He wasn't just giving me jewelry, he was putting a leash on his prize heifer. I waited until he left the room before I leaned toward the necklace, my voice barely a breath. "Oh, Grandma Rose. If only Julian knew about the other account. If he knew about the 50 million you hid in Zurich, he'd never believe it came from the Thorne archives." I knew he was listening. I could almost feel his greed vibrating through the walls. 10 minutes later, Julian was back, his face flushed with a desperate, hungry energy. He sat me down in his study, pushing a single sheet of paper toward me. "Clara, darling, I forgot one small detail," he said, his eyes darting toward the necklace. "With the wedding being so close, we need to consolidate some of the family land holdings. This is just a transfer for the vineyard in Napa. It's for our future, for the kids. I looked at the document. It wasn't a land transfer. It was a blank power of attorney form masked by a fake header. If I signed this, he could clean out every cent I actually owned before we even reached the altar. Julian, I'm so tired of all this paperwork, I said, looking at him with wide, watery eyes. Is it really necessary right now? He gripped my hand, his fingers digging into my skin. It's very necessary, Clara. Do this for me. Please, then we can forget about business and focus on the Maldives. The Maldives, I repeated, a cold smile touching my lips that he took for excitement. Yes, the Maldives. I'll sign it. Julian. Anything for my future husband. I signed the name Clara Vance with a flourish, knowing that in exactly 24 hours, the only thing he would be inheriting was a federal indictment. The game was no longer about survival. It was about making sure that when the Thorne Empire fell, I was the one holding the match. The atmosphere in the mansion had shifted from suffocating to lethal. I could feel Elena's eyes on me at lunch, a cold, predatory gaze that looked for any crack in my armor. She did not believe my apology from the morning. She was a Thorne. She knew that no one surrendered that easily. I waited for her to make her move. While I was at the final dress fitting in the West Wing, I knew she would be in my suite. I had left the bait in the bottom drawer of my nightstand, tucked inside a silk stocking. It was a cheap burner phone, preloaded with 1 month's worth of frantic, romantic texts to a man named Michael. Elena found it within 10 minutes. I knew because I saw her reflection in the hallway mirror as she slipped out of my room. Her face twisted in a mask of triumphant malice. She did not go to her mother. She went straight to Julian's study. I stood outside the heavy mahogany door, my heart a cold stone in my chest, listening to her venomous whispers. She's going to run. Julian. She has a lover. If she leaves before the ceremony, the insurance won't trigger. We lose everything. The creditors will be at the gates by Monday morning. You have to handle this tonight. Julian did not wait. He burst into my room 1 hour later, his face a shade of purple I had never seen before. He slammed the burner phone onto the vanity, shattering a bottle of expensive perfume. The scent of jasmine filled the room, cloying and sickly. "Who is he?" he roared, his hands trembling with a rage that was only half-staged. He needed me dead, but his ego could not handle the idea of being cheated on. I collapsed onto the bed, letting the tears flow freely. I looked up at him, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. "Julian, please, you have to understand. Understand what? That you've been planning to humiliate me." He stepped closer, his shadow looming over me like a shroud. I was just so scared. I wailed, the sound echoing off the marble walls. Your family, the way Elena looks at me. It feels like I'm being buried alive. Michael was. He was just a way to feel like I still existed, but I didn't go. I stayed here for you. I love you. Julian, please, don't leave me alone in this house. I reached for his hand, my fingers trembling as they brushed his sleeve. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything. I'll sign whatever you want. Just tell me you still want me. I need the Thorne family. I have nowhere else to go. Julian looked down at me, and for a second, I saw the flicker of absolute contempt in his eyes. He thought I was pathetic. He thought I was a broken bird he had finally crushed. It was exactly what he needed to believe to move forward with the kill. "I'm disappointed, Clara," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "But if you are truly as terrified as you say, then perhaps we should move our private celebration to tonight. A pre-wedding dinner, just the two of us, to clear the air. No more secrets." Tonight, I whispered, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. Yes, anything. Just us. He nodded curtly and left the room. I knew what tonight meant. It was the incident they had planned for the Maldives, moved up to the eve of the wedding. They were desperate, pushed into a corner by their own greed and the fake threat I had manufactured. As soon as the door clicked shut, I reached into the hidden pocket of my robe and pulled out my real phone. A single message was waiting from Marcus. Everything is ready. The rat is in the trap. The feds have the wiretap on the offshore accounts. Just survive the night. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fire. I had 48 hours left to live, or 10 minutes to win it all. I walked to the closet and pulled out a simple black dress. If I was going to my own execution, I was going to make sure the executioners were the ones who ended up in the noose. The clock on the mantel struck 7. 2 hours until dinner. 2 hours until the Thorne legacy began to burn. My laptop screen was the only source of light in the room at 3 in the morning. As a forensic auditor, I knew that the best way to destroy a giant was not to hit its head, but to cut off its heir. I spent 4 hours compiling the digital evidence I had stolen from the cellar, attaching every forged signature and every offshore routing number. With a single click, I sent a 50-page anonymous whistleblower report to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice. But I wasn't done. Using my high-level administrative credentials at Silver Creek, which served as the primary auditing firm for Ethelgard Dynamics, I initiated an emergency freeze on all outbound capital. I flagged the accounts for a routine compliance check, a process that would take at least 72 hours to clear. To the Thorne family, it would look like a bureaucratic hiccup. To me, it was the first nail in their coffin. The next morning, the mansion felt like a pressure cooker. Julian was pacing the terrace, his phone pressed so hard against his ear that his knuckles were white. "What do you mean the transaction is flagged?" he roared, his voice cracking with a desperation he couldn't hide. "It's $200 million. This is a ship construction payment. Get the manager on the line." Now I walked onto the terrace, holding a cup of herbal tea and wearing my most innocent expression. "Julian, honey, is something wrong? You look like you haven't slept a wink." He jumped, nearly dropping the phone. He forced a jagged, terrifying smile. It's nothing, Clara. Just a technical glitch at the bank. These offshore systems they are so unreliable sometimes. Go back inside and focus on your hair." "If you say so," I murmured, watching a bead of sweat roll down his temple. Later that afternoon, during the wedding rehearsal at the chapel, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and lies. Elena handed me the final set of family documents to sign in front of the witnesses. She was smug, believing she was finally cementing my financial doom. But while she was busy ordering the caterers around, I had swapped the pages in the leather-bound folder. Instead of land transfers and powers of attorney, the folder now contained detailed voluntary admission forms for financial malpractice. I signed them with a smile. Julian followed, scrawling his signature on the lines I pointed to without reading a single word. He was too distracted by the silent vibrating of his phone in his pocket. The real explosion happened an hour later in Lydia's private study. I stood in the hallway, my back pressed against the cold stone wall, listening to the screams. Lydia had sensed the shift in the wind and had demanded Elena double-check the insurance filings. How did this happen? Lydia's voice was a low, vibrating hiss of pure venom. "Elena, explain this to me right now." I don't know. Mother Elena sounded like she was on the verge of hyperventilating. "The beneficiary for the $50 million policy. It's been changed. It doesn't say Julian anymore. It says the National Foundation for Financial Integrity. It's a non-profit charity." "You incompetent fool," Lydia screamed. "That was our liquidity. That was our way out. It must be a system error." Elena sobbed. "I checked it myself. I swear. I did." I stepped away from the door. a cold sense of satisfaction blooming in my chest. I had used Julian's own password, the one I had observed him typing into his private encrypted laptop, to access the insurance portal at noon. It was a poetic end for their blood money. I returned to my suite and looked at the wedding dress hanging in the window. It was a masterpiece of lace and silk, a shroud fit for a queen. I sat down with a needle and thread, but I wasn't fixing a hem. I carefully tucked a micro recorder, no larger than a button, into the intricate lace of the bodice, right over my heart. "I'm ready, Grandma Rose," I whispered, looking at the faded photo of her I kept in my locket. They wanted a show. I'm going to give them a finale they will never forget. The clock on the mantel struck 11 o'clock, the chimes echoing through the hollow silence of the mansion like a funeral bell. I was sitting at the vanity, brushing my hair, when Julian walked in. He wasn't wearing his usual mask of charm. His eyes were bloodshot and his movements were twitchy, betraying the sheer pressure of the walls closing in on his empire. He held 2 crystal glasses of vintage Merlot, the dark liquid swirling like a pool of blood. "To our last night of freedom," he said, his voice straining to maintain a level of calm. He handed me the glass on the left. "Drink it, Clara. You've been so tense all day. You need to. You need to sleep. You look exhausted." I looked at the wine. Even in the dim light, I could see a faint, oily film on the surface. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face neutral. "You're right, Julian. I feel like I can't even breathe." Suddenly, his phone buzzed violently on the nightstand. He glanced at it, his face turning a sickly shade of gray as he saw a notification from the bank. He turned his back to me for 3 seconds, his fingers flying over the screen as he tried to figure out why his accounts were frozen. In that heartbeat, I swapped the glasses. "Is everything okay?" I asked, holding my new glass with steady fingers. "Just more technical issues," he growled, turning back and draining his glass in 3 large gulps. He watched me as I took a long, fake sip, letting the wine just touch my lips before pulling away. Within 5 minutes, the high dosage of sedatives took hold. Julian's eyes glazed over, and he began to sway. "I feel so heavy," he muttered, his tongue thick in his mouth. He collapsed onto the velvet sofa, his breathing turning into a ragged, wet snore. I didn't waste a second. I reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver key. I knew exactly where the private safe was hidden behind the portrait of his grandfather in the study. I ran down the hallway, the silence of the house feeling like a physical weight. I opened the safe and found exactly what I needed, a small, black digital recorder. I pressed play, and the voices that filled the room made my skin crawl. Sarah was easy. We just had to wait for the storm. Elena's voice was crystal clear, cold and devoid of any human emotion. But Clara is an auditor. She's too smart. We have to make it look like a suicide after the Maldives. "Julian, do you understand the debt is nearly $800 million now? We need that insurance payout immediately." "I'll handle it," Julian's recorded voice replied. "She trusts me." She's just a lonely girl looking for a family. She has no idea what's coming." I felt a wave of nausea, but I forced myself to stay focused. I plugged the recorder into my laptop and hit send all. The file went to the top 10 shareholders of Ethelgard Dynamics and the lead investigators at the SEC. "You're wrong, Julian," I whispered to the empty room. I knew exactly what was coming. The door to the study slammed open. Elena stood there, her face a mask of pure, unbridled rage. She was holding a heavy glass decanter, her knuckles white. You, bitch," she screamed, her voice cracking with a manic intensity. "I knew you were up to something. Give me that recorder. Now I'll kill you myself before I let you ruin this family." She lunged at me, the decanter raised high, but before she could reach the desk, A shadow stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains. Marcus moved with the speed of a professional, catching Elena's wrist and twisting it until the glass shattered on the floor. He pinned her against the wall, his face grim. "It's over." "Elena," I said, my voice as cold as the Seattle rain. "Call the police," she shrieked, struggling against Marcus. "I'll have you arrested for trespassing. I'll tell them you drugged Julian, no," I replied, walking toward the door. "I'm not calling the police yet. I want the whole world to see you fall tomorrow. I want the cameras, the investors, and the reporters to see the Thorne legacy die in the middle of a church." I walked back to the master suite and looked at the unconscious monster on my sofa. I picked up a tube of deep, blood-red lipstick from the vanity. With slow, deliberate strokes, I wrote a message across the grand mirror above the fireplace. "Grandma Rose sends her regards." I walked out of the room without looking back. Tomorrow, the wedding of the century was going to become the execution of a dynasty. The sun rose over the Puget Sound in a brilliant, mocking display of gold and azure. By 8 in the morning, the Thorne estate was crawling with a small army of florists, caterers, and security guards. Thousands of white roses had been shipped in, their cloying scent filling the air until it felt thick enough to choke on. Outside the iron gates, the lenses of 100 paparazzi cameras glinted like the eyes of hungry insects, all waiting to capture the wedding of the year. I sat in the bridal suite, a cavernous room of silk and silver, while 4 stylists worked on my hair and makeup. I looked at my reflection and saw a stranger. The white lace of the gown was intricate and heavy, a masterpiece of design that felt like a suit of armor. Beneath the delicate fabric of the bodice, I could feel the hard, tiny edge of the micro recorder pressed against my skin. It felt like a heartbeat. Julian stumbled into the hallway outside my room around 9 o'clock. Through the cracked door, I could hear his heavy, uneven footsteps. He was clutching his head, his face a ghostly, translucent white. Where is the aspirin?" he croaked, his voice sounding like it was being dragged over gravel. "My head. It feels like it is being crushed by a vice. What time? What time is it?" He had no idea. He hadn't checked his phone yet. He didn't know that while he was unconscious. The recorded confession of his crimes had been uploaded to a secure server and leaked to every major financial news outlet in the country. He didn't know that the Thorne name was currently the most hated phrase on social media. He was walking toward an altar, thinking he was about to claim a $50 million prize, unaware that he was stepping into a cage. Downstairs, the atmosphere was a frantic, controlled chaos. I caught a glimpse of Lydia Thorne through the window as she paced the terrace. Her usual icy composure was shattered. She was holding her phone to her ear, her hand shaking so violently that she nearly dropped it. "What do you mean everyone is pulling out?" I heard her hiss, her voice rising to a panicked shriek. "You cannot liquidate the pension fund. That is 40% of our remaining capital. Stop them. I don't care what the news says. It is all lies across the hall." Elena was in a state of pure, unadulterated mania. I could hear her tearing apart her guest room, furniture scraping against the floor as she searched for the evidence that had vanished into the night. "Where is it?" she screamed at a terrified maid. "The phone. The small black recorder, if you stole it. I will see you in prison. I cannot find it. It was right here. It has to be here." I stood up, the heavy silk of my skirt rustling like a warning. I had already made the call. At 10 o'clock sharp, I had contacted my liaison at the Federal Fraud Task Force. They were already in position, disguised as catering staff and secondary security. They were waiting for the moment the I-do's were supposed to be uttered to make their move. The music began a swelling, dramatic arrangement of strings that signaled the start of the ceremony. I walked toward the grand staircase, my veil trailing behind me like a shroud. As I reached the entrance of the chapel, I saw the hundreds of guests, the elite of American society, all dressed in their finest, clutching their champagne flutes. I stepped onto the aisle. Julian stood at the altar, looking handsome and hollow, his eyes searching mine for a submission that was no longer there. But I didn't look at him. I looked directly into the lens of the main television camera near the front row, the one broadcasting the ceremony live to the world. Just as I reached the halfway point, a strange, collective sound filled the room, a symphony of hundreds of smartphones chiming and vibrating at the exact same time. One by one, the guests reached into their pockets and purses. A single anonymous message had been sent to every person in the room through the event's guest Wi-Fi. Open your email right now. See the truth about the people you are celebrating. The music continued to play, but the silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Julian, and for the first time, I let the mask slip. I let him see the cold, calculating auditor who had just balanced the books. The audit. It is finally complete. Julian. I whispered, though no one could hear me over the rising murmurs of the crowd. The air in the chapel was suffocating, heavy with the silent judgment of the dead and the crushing weight of the Thorne's looming downfall. Julian stood before me, his eyes darting toward the back of the room as if he expected the walls to cave in at any moment. He looked like a man standing on a trapdoor. The priest cleared his throat, his voice echoing against the vaulted marble ceiling. Clara Vance, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I looked at Julian. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead and the way his hands were trembling within his silk gloves. I didn't whisper. I didn't hesitate. I reached out and took the microphone from the priest's hand, my voice ringing out with the cold, sharp precision of a gavel. I do not agree to marry cold-blooded murderer and a calculating financial predator, I said, the words cutting through the music like a blade. A collective, sharp intake of breath filled the room. Julian's face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. Clara. What? What are you doing? Stop this. Right now. Behind him, the massive LED screens that were supposed to show a montage of our romance suddenly flickered to life. But it wasn't our engagement photos. It was the grainy, high-definition footage of the secret cellar. The audio of Julian and Elena discussing the liquidation of the previous wives and the incident planned for me blasted through the speakers at a deafening volume. Sarah's death was only the beginning. We cleaned out her accounts before the body was even cold. Elena's recorded voice screamed through the chapel, cold and echoing. And Clara. We'll make her sign the debt restructuring. Then she's worth $50 million more to us dead than alive. Make it look like an accident in the Maldives. The chapel exploded into absolute, unbridled chaos. Hundreds of guests stood up, their faces twisted in horror and disbelief. Dozens of reporters, sensing the kill, surged forward with their cameras flashing like a summer lightning storm. You set us up, Julian roared, lunging toward me. I'll kill you. I'll destroy you before he could lay a finger on me. The doors at the back of the chapel burst open. A dozen federal agents in tactical gear, led by Marcus, stormed down the aisle. Julian Thorne, Elena Thorne. You are under arrest for federal securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The lead agent shouted. The sound of metal clicking echoed through the silence as they cuffed Julian and Elena right there at the altar. Elena was shrieking, her red dress torn as she struggled against the agents. Lydia Thorne, who had been watching from the front row, let out a choked, gurgling sound. Her hand clutched her chest as she collapsed into her seat, her eyes wide with the realization that $700 million of stolen wealth had just evaporated. Outside, federal trucks were already pulling up to Obsidian Manor to seize every asset they owned. I stepped toward Julian, who was pinned against the floral arrangement. I slowly reached up and unfastened the $10,000 diamond necklace from my neck. I dropped it into the dust at his feet. I pulled off the engagement ring and threw it at his chest. My grandmother was right, I said, my voice low and vibrating with a century of her pain. And now you will pay for everything, every lie, every theft, and every second of my grandmother's life that you stole. Clara, please. I can't breathe. Let me explain, Julian choked out, his eyes bulging with terror. I didn't answer. I turned my back on the wreckage of the Thorne family. Within 2 hours, the news wires confirmed that Ethelgard Dynamics had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The accounts I had frozen were never released to them. The empire was gone. I walked out of the chapel doors into the blinding Seattle sun. I reached up and tore the heavy lace veil from my head, letting the wind catch it and carry it away. For the first time in years, I drew a breath that didn't feel like it was filtered through a lie. I looked down at the small photo of Rose I had tucked into my bouquet and smiled. 6 months later, the name Thorne was a stain on the history of the Northwest. I used the whistleblower rewards and my own savings to found a firm dedicated to protecting women and small investors from the predators of the elite. I named it Rose Justice. The vultures were in cages, and the books were finally balanced. Thank you so much for listening to this story of revenge and justice. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below and let me know where in the world you are listening from today. It is always wonderful to connect and share thoughts with all of you. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by many more people. Your support means everything.